I saw this story just over the course of the show. I was reading in after we had our interview with President Trump during the commercial breaks here. Clay, this is remarkable. Let me just step back for a second. There should be consequences for bad decision-making in politics, and that includes not only people who are in elected office as members of whether it's the governor, state legislature, Congress, et cetera, but also down to the school district level. I think we've started to see the mom rebellion against the mask mandates and CRT teaching in school really become a political movement unto itself. But there have to be consequences for bad decision making, and I would even say for tyranny. And this is great. This is from just a few days ago up on Forbes. Florida House votes to, it's now with the news today is that it is with the Senate in Florida, the state Senate here, votes to strip $200 million from schools that imposed mask mandates against the governor's executive order. So the Florida House passed a budget that takes $200 million funding away from schools that impose the mandate. And the Putting Parents First Amendment, introduced by Republican State Representative Randy Fine, would divert school funding away from 12 counties that impose school mask mandates and shift it instead to 55 school districts that never required masks. The budget, including the amendment, passed in a 102-14 vote. Some Democrats voted against it because of the amendment. We're getting into the details here a little more than people need to know. But I thought the most interesting part of this, and this comes from DeSantis spokeswoman Christina Pushaw, because people are, of course, saying, oh, my gosh, they're cutting all the funding from schools. She says they shouldn't have broken the law. This is a quote from her Twitter just now. They shouldn't have broken the law by force masking children against parents' wishes. This cut only affects salaries of school administrators over $100,000, so it is not intended to educate children. It will go to the 55 districts that followed the law. Actions have consequences. Yes, this is what needs to happen now, folks. You have to have, in places where Republicans, where conservatives have power, whether it's at the school board level, all the way up the governor's mansion, you got to get rid of the mask-loving commies on your school board. You got to actually punish districts that think. And I hope, we're going to have Glenn Youngkin on tomorrow. I'm going to ask him about this one because he's had defiant districts in his state that think that they don't have to listen to the governor. When the governor's a Democrat, it's shut up, peasants, do whatever he says. When it's a Republican, it's, oh, we're going to do our own thing. Well, not allowed to happen anymore, folks. Not on DeSantis's watch.
What I think is so important, there have to be consequences. What do you hire a politician for? Judgment. You hire a politician when it really gets down to it, when you and I and everybody out there listening to us goes and votes, ultimately what you're voting for is I trust this person to make the right decisions, to have the right judgment when it comes to so many different issues out there across the board. And if we do not, and I mean this for people out there who are independents, I mean this out there, and by the way, we see the numbers. A lot of you may have leaned Democrat over time, but you now, because of COVID and the insanity that you see in the country, you're listening to us, and certainly everybody out there who's Republican. There have to be consequences. There have to be consequences, Buck, for getting everything wrong on COVID, for telling you that one business was essential and non-essential, for telling you that you couldn't be in a hospital with an seriously ill relative, for telling you that your kids couldn't get on a swing set, for making your kids wear masks for 2 years. All of those things. That doesn't even need to consider the border, the murder rate, defund the police. All of these failures, Afghanistan, Ukraine, all of them demand consequences. And if there are not consequences in 2022, what you are effectively saying as a nation is judgment doesn't matter. And Buck, I may be completely naive. A lot of people say, "Oh, you're way too optimistic." We had a conversation last night. People, "Oh, you believe too good." I think people ultimately get things right. I think they got them wrong in the 2020 presidential election. But I think if you look at what's going to happen in 2022, they are going to reap the whirlwind of their lies and of their judgment failures. That's why we have to have an ass kicking. I don't want one of these things where we have to stay up till 3 a.m. worrying about when the votes are going to come in and what it's going to look like. I don't want it to be close. I want it to be a destruction.
If we are not jet skiing around on a tidal wave of lib tears in this midterm after the votes are counted,
yes,
it is not good enough.
I
we
agree.
have not done well enough, because when you see the scale and the gravity, to the point you made about all these different decisions, the gravity of the failures and the experiment of federalism has allowed us to see, at a time of national crisis, who got it right and who got it wrong. And states and people voted with their feet, and people have seen the reality, and the data now is incontrovertible. The blue lockdown authoritarian Biden voting masses in New York and California, and I know they oppress fellow New Yorkers who are Republican like me with their bad decision making, and the same thing for all of our listeners in California. We have to live in the same state as these loons. There needs to be the accountability for all that was done, and also the arrogance, Clay, and the vindictiveness that came along with it. I mean, what you've really seen here is that now the whole masking and vaccine mandate thing has gone from an argument over science to a question of political defiance and just stubbornness and bitterness. We're going to continue with mandates to punish people. Look what they've done in Canada. They're continuing with the mandate. You don't even hear about COVID cases right now because they've gone so far, so fast down, which is great. But there has to be a reckoning, a nationwide reckoning of the people who decided they had all the answers, they knew what was best. They are the ones who will actually, they're the ones that need to suffer the consequences now by being pushed out of power.